Hello, my name is Katelyn Morrison, and I'm starting my third year as a PhD student in the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. Today, I'd like to talk about a recent small empirical study that we did, which seeks to understand the alignment between human perception, vision architectures, and saliency map techniques. I'll present how there is shared interest among these three factors sometimes, and wrap up with some key takeaways from our findings. Even though saliency maps were designed to provide insight into a model's prediction, there have been numerous studies now showing that they can be confusing and misleading to decision makers, hurting the human AI team performance. With studies showing saliency maps to be misleading or confusing, several follow-up studies explored ways to design more human-centered saliency maps by trying to understand human perception. Past work has used a variety of approaches to understand how saliency maps align with human perception, including but not limited to eye tracking studies, image annotation studies, and rating the relevancy of the saliency map. Within the image annotation studies, there have been a variety of evaluations, such as comparing a single technique across multiple models. For example, one study investigates GradCam using the saliency benchmark dataset, which includes human attention maps. This study looks at an EfficientNet, a ResNet, and a VGG. And since GradCam is an attribution method producing a heat map, they were able to calculate the intersection of a union between human attention maps and the saliency maps for GradCam from each model. Another study proposed a new saliency map technique, XRAI, and visually compared it to GradCam for two different CNNs. Their visual analysis was to showcase simply how the XRAI technique and GradCam capture different regions of the image. So while studies in the past have evaluated one architecture with multiple saliency map techniques, or multiple models of the same type of architecture with one saliency map technique, none of them, to our knowledge, evaluate different types of architectures with multiple saliency map techniques and compare them to human perception. Another dimension of debate related to human-centered explanations is which architectures aligns more with human perception. With vision transformer architectures becoming better than traditional CNNs in many cases, recent studies have started investigating which architecture should be used for high-stakes computer vision tasks, such as identifying the species of butterflies to classifying plant diseases and diseases from medical images. But before we can decide if everyone should switch to transformers or what saliency map technique they should use, we need to better understand the shared interest across these different dimensions: the explanation technique, the architecture, and a combination of both. More specifically, we seek to understand which saliency map technique aligns more with human perception, which architecture aligns more with human perception, and to what extent the saliency technique and architecture choice play a role in how much shared interest there is with human perception. For our empirical study, we evaluated 2 attention-based architectures and 2 CNN-based architectures. All of the models that we used were pre-trained on ImageNet. We evaluated these models on a subset of ImageNet models from the ML interpretability benchmark. And this benchmark selected 20 classes from ImageNet and 5 images from each class, totaling 100 images. For every model, for every image, we generated their saliency maps with 2 different saliency map techniques. We compare the generated saliency maps with the attention maps from the ML interpretability benchmark, which were obtained from crowdsourcing studies on Mechanical Turk. Lastly, we compare the saliency maps to the human attention maps using the shared interest metrics, which were proposed by Bogus et al. In 2022. And those metrics specifically include intersection over union, saliency coverage, and ground truth coverage. The specific attention-based architectures we chose to use include the small Schwinn transformer from Microsoft and the small class attention for image transformers model from Mehra. These 2 models have approximately the same number of trainable parameters and approximately the same top 1 accuracy. For the convolutional neural networks, we chose to use an EfficientNet P6 and a ResNet 101 because they are similar in terms of the number of trainable parameters to the attention-based architectures that we use. Although they do have slightly less trainable parameters, we still consider this to be reasonable for comparison. Lastly, we chose to only evaluate GradCam and XRAI as the two saliency map techniques. We chose these two because GradCam is very popular, it's a canonical saliency map technique right now, and XRAI is a more recent, novel technique that is an attribution method like GradCam. The XRAI authors also compare their own method XRAI to GradCam for two different types of CNNs, which validates our own comparison here. In terms of our results, first we look at the shared interest with the saliency techniques as if we ignore the architecture, which means we combine the intersection over union for all architectures and only filtered by saliency technique. Looking specifically at the intersection over union metric on the y-axis and the type of saliency technique on the x-axis, we see that the mean for GradCam is statistically significantly higher than XRAI. And this trend holds for the saliency coverage and ground truth coverage metrics. If we look at architecture and ignore that there are different saliency map techniques, which means we include the intersection over union for both techniques for each model, then we can see that generally the CNNs are more aligned with human perception than the attention-based architectures. However, the class attention for image transformers model is the only model that was statistically significantly different from the other three models. The spin transformer was not significantly different from the CNNs. This trend holds for the other two metrics, the ground truth coverage and the saliency coverage. Lastly, if we look at all the shared interest metrics for each model and the saliency technique combination, then we observe that the shared interest metrics for Schwinn transformer and GradCam combination is statistically significantly better than the other models when paired with GradCam. However, for XRAI, the efficient net is statistically significantly better than the other models when paired with XRAI. These findings show us that saliency map techniques have shared interest with human perception sometimes. This motivates that it is important to consider shared interest sometimes as we continue to evaluate and understand how saliency maps align with human perception. These findings also show that choosing a saliency map technique and model combination is not trivial. We should avoid evaluating the model or the saliency technique in isolation when it comes to trying to choose which aligns the most with human perception. However, isolated studies like this could allow technical researchers to identify individual components of saliency maps or architectures that contribute to shared interest. Thank you to the workshop organizers for putting together this awesome workshop, to all the other presenters on their great work, and to everyone involved in reviewing our work. I'm happy to take any questions you may have now.